Tonight, December 25th, is the night of one of the biggest holidays in one of the major world religions, celebrated by billions of people worldwide. But, as an American, tonight means just a little bit more to me than that. On this night, in 1776, George Washington took an army across the Delaware River and defeated an army of trained mercenaries hired by the British. So who were the Hessians? Well, they were mercenaries hired by the British to help fight the rebellion in America, and they got their name from the German state of Hesse, where many of them came from. This was before Germany was unified. Although it wasn't uncommon to hire mercenaries in European wars, it made the Americans very angry that their own king would send foreign troops to stomp them down. It's estimated that 30,000 Germans fought with the British against the colonials in all, although many of them deserted and stayed in America because land wasn't hard to get. In fact, the Americans offered many of them free land, because they didn't want the British to have an army. The fact that many parts of America already had significant German populations played into this heavily. I've seen estimates between 3,000 and 14,000 German mercenaries settled in America or deserted. Although the Hessian troops commonly fought for various European nations as mercenaries, they weren't paid directly. They were actually part of the standing army for their state, and the person who got all the money was their prince, Frederick II. They had a reputation for being strict and inhumane to prisoners, although some of the Hessians put in their diaries that they didn't like the way British troops treated American prisoners. In December of 1776, Washington's army had already encountered the Hessians during the Battle of Long Island, where some Hessian troops notoriously killed some surrendering Americans. This was the impression that the Continental Army had of them. That winter, though, morale in the American camp was barely high enough for them to care. Throughout the year, Washington had retreated from battle after battle, not making any significant gains. Worse, both sides were encamped and not expecting much conflict during the winter months, and the end of the troops' enlistment contracts would be coming around the end of December. Without much food or glory, not that many of them were expecting to stick with the cause. They would go home without renewing their enlistment. Washington needed to turn morale before he lost all his troops. George's plan of attack involved a spy named John Honeyman. Honeyman allegedly offered his services to Washington in 1755, and since he had been acting as a loyalist in public. When Honeyman's home in Griggstown, New Jersey was raided by a mob of angry patriots, he had a convenient excuse to move his family to British-occupied Trenton. Meanwhile, Washington put out orders that the notorious Tory, John Honeyman, was to be brought straight to Washington alive and unharmed if he was found. Honeyman was captured by Washington's army that December. Washington had a conversation with Honeyman, who had been living in Trenton. That night, Honeyman was locked in a small hut by the Continentals. After being locked inside there, a fire broke out in the hut, and Honeyman used the chaos as an opportunity to escape. He then went back to Trenton and told the Hessian commander, Johann Rall, that Washington's army was much too demoralized to do any attacking. Now, I should put an asterisk here and say that some of the Honeyman story isn't verified by primary sources. This is just the version that historians have pieced together and commonly accept. Just for fun, I'll include a link to a source critical of the Honeyman story. It's the one on the CIA website. I'll mark it in the description. So with that information in Washington's hands, he decided the best time to move was on Christmas night. The plan involved splitting the army into 3 groups, and then moving all 3 groups across the frozen Delaware River in the middle of the night, in different places, before having all of them strike at the Hessian locations at roughly the same time. The first group, 1,800 troops led by Colonel Cadwalader, was to cross from Pennsylvania over to Burlington, New Jersey, to the south of Trenton, where they would distract Hessians in Burlington so they couldn't help the Hessians at Trenton. The second group of 800, led by General James Ewing, was to cross at Trenton and block the Hessians' retreat. And finally, the main force of 2,400, led by Washington himself, was to cross about 10 miles north of Trenton and march to attack the town from the north. Well, only one of those groups successfully crossed, Washington's. And even then, that group was late by 3 hours. The plan was to strike at dawn. The reason the crossing was so hard was because of the ice on the river, which the famous painting accurately depicts. But missing from the painting is a blinding snowstorm and that would make even the toughest New England school districts call a 2-hour delay, while Californians raid Walmarts and stockpile like doomsday preppers. This is the reason that fighting during the winter was uncommon at the time. Now, you may be thinking it's amazing, with all that wasted time and all those delays in crossing the river and marching south to Trenton, that the Hessians there didn't know they were coming. And you'd be right. It is nothing short of amazing that this attack managed to remain a surprise. First up, they were actually spotted crossing the river. A loyalist New Jersey resident saw a group of thousands of rebel troops unloading boats on the east shore, and he was shocked to say the least. So he did what any good monarchist, traitor, would do, and he went to the nearest Hessian camp, which happened to be Trenton, and asked to see their commander so that he could warn them. He walked up to the command building and asked to see Colonel Rahl. The doorman said that Rahl was busy, but he could take a note. The loyalist scribbled some words down on a piece of paper describing what he saw and gave it to the doorman, confident that King George's second best could defend against America's tired, uppity little treasonous troublemakers. Well, and this is where it gets good, the doorman took the note inside to Colonel Rahl's poker table, where he was smoking and playing cards with several of his officers. Rahl, disgruntled at being interrupted, took the note and put it in his pocket without even reading it. The poker game continued, but the Hessians had one more chance to spot the Americans and prepare any kind of defense against the attack. These were professional soldiers who were fighting as mercenaries, so of course, one would expect they were professional enough to have people scouting around the outside of the camp. In fact, they did, or they would have. They were supposed to have a small group of people go out at dawn, like they did every day, just to look around and make sure the exact thing that was about to happen wasn't going to happen. I like to imagine this was something like a sitcom moment where the scouts stepped outside, saw the weather, locked eyes with each other, and in unison said, "Nah," and went back inside to be warm. Washington's crossing was finished at 3 a.m. He was supposed to be across at midnight. As the troops started marching south, people from houses nearby saw them out their windows, grabbed muskets, and started marching with the army. They sent groups of scouts ahead of them to detain Loyalist spies and set up roadblocks, blocking the Hessians from escaping. Washington's troops marched into town to find the Hessians completely unprepared to defend. After some small amount of fighting and a charge to take control of the Hessian cannons that managed to get a few shots off, the battle was over. Although 2 Americans died during the march because of the cold conditions, none of them died during the actual battle. 22 Hessians were killed, however, and 800 were taken prisoner. Also, future American President James Monroe was shot in the neck while trying to take the cannons, but he was able to recover. The body of Colonel Rahl was later found with the unopened letter about Washington's crossing still in his pocket. This battle gave Washington the morale boost he needed to make his soldiers willing to re-enlist for 1 more year. Shortly after New Year's, Washington would go on to launch a similar surprise attack on the New Jersey town of Princeton against a British garrison. The Hessians that were wounded and captured were taken back across the river deep into Pennsylvania, a little place called Lancaster. They were watched over by the Pennsylvania Dutch, who spoke German and could easily communicate with the Hessians. They were treated nicely as guests, and as a result, many of the Hessians simply decided to stay and live in Pennsylvania. This battle became a symbol of American willingness to fight for freedom. It was such a turning point in the war that it inspired the famous painting in 1851 that most Americans can instantly recognize. The painting can be seen in the Met in New York City. This battle is one of my favorite parts of American history, and I'm glad I could share it with you. Till next time, God bless America.